Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for our next installment of Red Hen Press Reading and Conversation Series. I'm Toby Harper.
And I'm Monica Fernandez.
And we are incredibly excited to bring this conversation to you this evening. We would like to begin by acknowledging that on the land on which Monica and I are broadcasting from is the occupied and seized territory of the Gabrielino, Tongva, and Kizh people. The native language of the Tongva has made an important resurgence thanks to the UCLA linguistics professor Pamela Monroe. This LA Times article from 2019 discusses her monthly class where she works to bring light to this native language. We hope more universities across the country and world will continue this important work. If you know of any Native American language classes in your area, please let us know in the comments. Tonight's guests are from Red Hen's newest imprint, Crooked Hearts Press, which showcases work by women writers over the age of 55. We're excited to welcome to the virtual stage the co-founder of Crooked Hearts Press, Barbara Allen, who will also be the moderator tonight, Janice Dewey, co-founder and poet, and prolific poet Eleanor Wilner. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody. Welcome. Can't wait for this event. All right,
Hello.
Take it away, Barbara.
Okay. Hello, and thank you, dear disembodied friends, for being here. And thank you, Red Hen, for your patience, championship, and stellar advocacy of Crooked Hearts Press. Janice and Eleanor will be telling their versions of Crooked Heart Press and what it has meant to them. So I will only mention that it really was a conversation between Eleanor and Janice about the lack of women writers over 55 and the challenges to get these voices heard. That kind of spearheaded this amazing endeavor, which was supported by Red Hen Press, which we are so deeply indebted to them. I am going to introduce Janice, our first reader, and Eleanor, who will be the second reader. And then they'll read each for about 10 minutes. We'll come back on for a conversation, and then we'll wrap up with a little preview of what's happening with Crooked Hearts Press. So again, we really appreciate you being here, and I know that you will love these amazing poets. Janice Dewey, who will read first from her book, How to Feed a Horse, has had a career in literature and teaching, beginning at the young age with scholarship to live and study in both Argentina through the American Field Service in Chile on a Fulbright scholarship. Janice has taught Spanish, women's studies, humanities, and contemporary poetry at the University of Arizona and its Poetry Center. She has also created and made the documentary Waist High in the World about the disability writer Nancy Mears. Janice will be reading from her first book, How to Feed a Horse. Eleanor Wilner is the author of 8 previous collections of poetry, most recently Before Our Eyes, New and Selected Poems, 1975, 2017, from Princeton University Press. Her many awards include the 2019 Frost Medal for Distinguished Lifetime Achievement from Poetry Society of America, a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, and the Juniper Prize and 3 Pushcart Prizes. She has taught for years in the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College. She'll be reading today from one of the 2 inaugural books from Crooked Hearts Press, along with Janice's book, How to Feed a Horse, the other inaugural book, Gone to Earth, Early and Uncollected Poems, 1965 to 1975. Thank you both, Janice and Eleanor, and enjoy the reading.
Hello. I came into ranch lands in central Arizona 20 years ago. Very special lands that were riparian. They had a lot of water, a creek running through them, and huge big trees. But I watched the water slowly go away and dry up. For example, there may have been 60 or 70 bird species and flocks of birds But now there are only maybe 15 and no flocks of birds. So I watched this incredible environment slowly get drier and drier. And everything I've said to you is contained in this poem called Inferno. Summer inferno with drought markers, grasshopper invasion, biting flies, gas refrigerator dead, herding dogs exhausted from shooing herd creatures, creek artery drying out. Sitting there in the long-looking long field, orange-brown dried leaves, stark-armed and legged trees. So much hacking by chain now, sycamores and ash, one bird and one bird, looking south toward the Gila, snaking water. Green-soaked treasure grove borders the cattle, arranges them along broken limbs where they twist stalks of seep willow, flourishing in green, brooking the landscape and brooming it too. One bird in field capsule, hover in want. This poem is called Bullseye. In the practice of eternity, trees rocket to the surface over eons. Fish swim in schools through never-ending curvaceous waves. The practice of eternity opens doors for the dead, that they may come to supper and blow out candles, for this is common in calendar time. But how to hear the voice, the one never recorded, here now, seated at the table. The so long ago voice, gravelly cinders of tender language, not sounding at ghost dinner. The practice of eternity is wandering amongst the grand appearances barefoot, allows the earth to give under the feet, reminds of volcanic archives bent on opening, charging anytime. For the practice of eternity, an archer sucks in breath, counts to 5, and releases to target dead on. This next poem I'm going to refer to later on when we talk about process, and it's called Coyote Dog. Coyote Dog didn't need to log onto beliefnet.com to pick stars or spirits of the day. It was Friday the play day, one for fools and poised dancers and a steep ledge of recognition to slide down, belly primed with prickly pear and rat. The other pack howlers were way off and keening. Night wind, a telephone line straight to Coyote Dog, sitting ledge watch on sacred haunches, the nose aloft and ears prickled, giant sound receptors for desert wisdom. I hear you rustling, Colorado toad. You can't hide those clicks or that plopping girth. Take this message back to creek rocks. One can't move along the sand without an exit strategy. One can't hide in the water without air. Tell the rocks to stay where they are until the pack arrives to lick their quartz faces. This is my title poem, and we'll talk about titles later. How to feed a horse. It is different from feeding a growing boy like James, who could eat a horse. Still, I am enamored of horse eyelashes and mules and llamas, longer even. There is no shirking their loving glances. I'm being roped in, lassoed by lashes to a feeding seduction, intimate sharing. So bring on the boxes of rinsed carrots and let me splat a striped watermelon on the ground. For I am satisfied by approximations to the big fabled mouths, cartoon teeth crunching, crunching. How's the time here? 12. This poem has the number 12 on it, and I'll explain why all these numbers are happening in the middle of the book. But for now, 12. Wake up, rock, said the blade of grass pressing. Wake up, wound, said the surgeon. Wake up, tenant, said the robber. And wake up, mouth, said the expletive. Even two lips cannot equal one word. Wake up, success, said perseverance. Be tolerant, don't growl, and be patient. Wake up, sleeper, said the dream. The earth is spinning mightily at its core. Your magnetism spills out into the day. Wake up, pilgrim, said the sun. I am already shining on your navel. The title of this poem comes from Joy Harjo. Even grief gets hungry and demands more grief. In the darkest passage of the Holy Book, there is no sound or word. You could not take it by mouth. One would need to feed the nervous system some other way, not by mouth. One would need to lay prostrate on the ground with one's eyes and mouth closed, hands stretched forward, laid out bare in the night's imaginings, the dark. Like the ground needed bodies close and alive, not the bones marked by centuries of stones everlasting. Prone on the ground, and an event of sincere gratitude, nostrils breathing life force and dirt. Upside down world to the woman standing on the tarmac, her coat blowing wide open in the wind. You know, that last line is kind of whiplash for me every time I see it and every time I read it. So I just like to say this is a poem about grief, and I take the reader down to the ground in it, all the way down to the very dirt for some kind of consolation or connection, and then boom, here's this woman standing on the tarmac. I see her as a professional woman. She's about to jet off to her business. And I think that the big word in the last line that gets you and moves you is the word tarmac, because I've moved you from ground to civilization. And this is my final poem. Transfiguration. How much does the tree remain in this paper? Its bark, nesting places, the branch arms and seasonal change. How much mother's milk remains in our bodies along the loving rainbow DNA of parental? Or when does the bud and its flowering pass over into enchantment and then turn downward into dry end times? Or the water evaporating and receding, atonement for our human firing up of energy? Oh, water, when will the tides turn? Last night when the full moon chased me from window to window, its startled face shining on my attention, I asked it about the water, the tides. I asked it about the trees that transcribed this poem. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Janice, for those poems. They are so deep into the land, you can hear it thinking. And congratulations on, I have to show and tell, How to Feed a Horse. And thank you and Barbara for inviting me aboard the maiden voyage of Crooked Hearts Press, a venture I am happy to support for its goal of bringing more older women of talent into print. So here we go. I'm going to try to stay off the tarmac. You know, it's odd to be reading from poems written nearly 50 years ago. But the oddest thing is when I rescued these poems from their long confinement, though the woman who wrote them seems like another person entirely, the imaginative process of transformation that these poems open seems entirely organic with what followed, as if it were all one slow unfolding. So I don't feel estranged from this early stage, but simply grateful for its having begun, all unbidden, for none of it was planned. These early poems enact a struggle against the containment of the past and seek to free the imagination from its entrapment in ossified, oppressive, and deadly forms. I'd like to read just two poems. One of them is quite long. The first, Crossing the Equator, is about woman as figurehead, elevated but denied real power. And here she is, carved by a man, poised, winged and ready to fly. But she is wooden, bound to the prow of the ship, made to breast the waves on a ship on which women were never permitted. And what if one night she came to? And what if she spread those wings? So when you hear the sound of splintering in the poem, you'll know it's the sound of breaking free. And when you hear her high-pitched wail, you'll know the tearing pain of separation from old ways of being. Crossing the Equator. Beacon lights had guarded every coast. Rock-bound calm kept the craft moored. But wind does what it will, rising, tearing pages one by one from books, filling the night with useless white wings, Icarus falling through centuries. The sun, too, had done its work. The ship, once set away, breast the waves with the woman on its prow, carved, poised against the latitudes, forced by troughs into the eyes of whales and smaller shiftless fish. Frost on her chiseled brow, frozen waves of hair carry the eye back to where the halyards strain, singing in the Arctic wind. One night, setting a southern course, a sudden splintering with a screech so cruel and desolate, only a being freed and torn by separation could raise so black a wail. The sails wrench against their lines and dark wings beat the sky. The storm, when great air masses meet, or birds migrate in hungry hordes, or when the night has run its course, there rise, white on the edge, the black-breasted, green-tongued waves of dawn. The last poem I'm going to read is a long one. It comes near the end of the book, and it announces what was to be the imaginative venture of a lifetime It's one that is both communal and singular. The attempt to make ancient myths and older forms release their powers in ways that change the very meanings they once carried. The title is a question that was actually asked to me by a fellow poet. And yeah, he was a fellow. What do myths have to do with the price of fish? You know, these kind of readings where you have to look at your face and watch what time has done to it, it's daunting. What do myths have to do with the price of fish? I thought about your question, you who are so entirely American. And as Wallace Stevens always said, there never was a time when we had myths in Connecticut. Though I admire Richard Hugo and his triggering town, his fly-speck bars in underpopulated Montana, his hand-tied flies and leaping trout, I can't agree with what he said to me. You write about things you don't give a damn about. He meant, of course, things he didn't give a fig for, and he was not alone in that. Though insofar as he is true Northwestern, he feels alone as any tracker, searching for his image in a wilderness of grass. It's true that myths, especially classical, are out of fashion, and maybe after all that is the point. Those figures whom no one anymore believes in, especially in Montana, are safe from relevance, commercial interruption. They live in fields long since grown over, where lizards and wildflowers have reclaimed the ruins, where America is not what is the matter, but something older, deeper, that has everything to do with us. In some imagined attic light, so lambent you can see the breeze move through the groves of olive. Some ancient inmost part begins to stir, and silent women in outdated robes walk slowly, as figures move through centuries, like the memory of patience, through the twisted trunks of olive trees, till the sun breaks through the clouds of history. And for a moment, long as centuries, or like the time that only stones remember, none of all this had to happen. The missiles slide back on their tracks and vanish. The atom heals like water when a ship has passed. The conquering hordes decide to stay at home in their green pastures. Hitler goes on painting houses. No one ever kills for Christ. Who goes to Alexandria becomes a teacher. Today becomes a time being read about 10,000 years into the future, watched over by the stars as they are now, for only then will their light reach us. A time when no one anymore believes that teams of surgeons followed in the wake of armies to patch together bodies sent there to be blown apart by their own fathers. And Bonaparte's a man remembered for his skill with horses, and Nagasaki is a place admired for its gardens. So I go back the way we came, or we imagined. Old stories live in us and can be changed. To urge Penelope to leave her loom, her repetition, her high position as the Lord's forsaken mistress only tempts the greed of suitors, and nothing anyway stops time. So tell it over. Try to make it serve us better. Warn the fierce, naive Medea not to go with the ambitious Jason. Tell Ariadne to save her string and go instead to the deep chamber in the center of the maze and take her brother that sweet imprisoned monster by the horns, and lead him with her to the huge sun-drenched abundance that will pasture them a while, the place we have despoiled, running from the death god Pluto instead of turning to embrace him, being deathless only in desire, not blaming others for the fact that we are real, sport for the gods whose only pleasure is the time when they take on a mortal body, consort with others, dance a measure, giving themselves at last to dust that spirals where the air meets sunlight, as all those do who know that myths no one believes in, free of dogma, no blood on their altars, are like slaves unshackled from a master, serving no one but the errant truth, free to go the way their minotaurs will lead them. Half animal, half human, and this time nothing monstrous, but a creature with a double vision, chewing grass and gazing at the heavens, untouched by jealousy or fear, content to let the dragons pass unmolested, setting out to conquer nothing, knowing there is nothing now to win. For while they slept 10,000 years, victory turned to ashes, and the artists of the empire fashioned them an urn. So now we turn again to sun, where dust is dancing, pagans chastened by the centuries of separation, and turn to springs of real water, bereft of muses, but shining from their passage or from light, returning to the garden we won't call Eden, but simply earth. And having eaten of the tree of knowledge, this time we'll pick the other tree and eat the fruit of life. Thank you.
Oh, beautiful women. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you a few questions. The first couple questions will be for both of you to answer, and then I'll alternate a little bit. Could each of you talk about the origin story of your books, in particular their late publication? Anybody want to go first? Janice, you want to go first?
Well, are you talking about the origin of Crooked Hearts, or
no, of your book?
Well, the book developed over many, many years, and I collected them and tried to get them out there, and that took quite a long time until we came along and Eleanor came along. But so much of it is rooted in a sanctuary. I would escape to a sanctuary and quiet to deal with my own feelings and bring in that entire environment. And that's really the genesis. Also, there are many poems that came out of my writers group, a group of women, maybe 5 or 6 women at a time. And many of them came from there into the book. That's my answer.
Eleanor.
Well, I had urged Janice to start her own press. We can talk a little bit more about that later. And so the question was, what to put in this book to help launch this wonderful press for women of a certain age. So I had just published a Selected and New, which went from 75 to 2017. And so this book kind of completes a chronology. I went to the drawer and discovered this, what was really a manuscript and a half of poems that I had not published. The reason I didn't publish them, I discuss in the preface to the book, It has many causes, most of them having to do with being a woman at a certain time and place, and wanting to protect myself from, how shall we say, the wrong sort, the fashions of the day, and the wrong sort of readers, who were at that time mostly or all men who seemed to like and particularly love to give prizes to and cheer for women who committed suicide. So it seemed a good idea to keep the poems to myself. And as I said in my introduction, I was happy to discover that they really were integral to a process which gave me the poems for the rest of my life. Also, I set the bar very high for myself because my teachers were the great dead. And so I was comparing myself. They had set the bar so high that I didn't think my poems were much worth publishing. So there were a number of factors. There was always more than one reason for things.
Yes.
Many contributing causes, including reticence, and the wisdom to know that sometimes early in the process, just as you don't x-ray infants in the womb, it's better to keep it to yourself. And by the time you write, you're writing out of the imagination and not out of somebody else's opinion.
Nice. Yep, that's what Crooked Hearts is all about, Eleanor. So thank you. I probably should have asked this question first, but if you could each talk a little bit about Crooked Hearts Press and why you have found it such a much needed enterprise. Let's begin with you, Eleanor.
Well, it
started with, yeah.
No, go ahead, Janice, please.
Well, yes. Eleanor Wilner came to my classroom at the University of Arizona, and she was so wonderful there and warm and funny, and she gave a reading that night. And because of her basic personality, I guess I would say, I got the guts to write her an email. And the subject line was shameless question. And the shameless question was, how do you ever get published? It had been a long struggle, a long time. And she wrote back a long response and said she knew of other manuscripts that could not find a home. So Janice, why don't you just start a press? Well, that was very exciting, also very complicated, etc. And anyway, we did that. And I asked her, would you be interested in publishing anything with us? And she immediately said yes. Let me think about it. She came back with 3 different ideas and settled on the uncollected poems. So that was the beginning. And then Barbara, you are the point woman and the originator of the imprint idea. So I'll pass it to you on that one.
Well, yes, you and Eleanor had this great exchange, and then it kind of got time to find out the who, what, when, where of how this would happen. And luckily, we did have community of friends who recommended Red Hen Press, and that we contacted them. And I was able to talk about your poetry, Janice, and also Eleanor's poetry, and also Eleanor's advocacy of our enterprise. And I think together that piqued Red Hen's interest, and the rest is history. How about you, Eleanor?
Well, I just want to say something to the necessity for presses like this. There are now, I think, several hundred degree granting MFA programs in America. When I started, there were 2. Now there are hundreds. Everyone who graduates comes out with a manuscript of their thesis. There's a flood. I'm happy that there's so many people writing poetry. But the problem for older women is they're looking for the next new thing. And there's another reason for my real interest in this is that it's women who postpone their writing and their development and their publication and their seeking of it for the needs of others. And so all of this rich experience in these lives, which now are producing mature and gorgeous poetry, all of this talent, nobody's really out there looking for it at the presses. And the contests are a lottery and crapshoot and not worth thinking about. So to get someone not just to take your manuscript, but even to read it seriously. So rejections don't mean anything often because they're huge piles and they don't pay attention. And so I'm always telling people to start their own process. And this is a gorgeous example of two women who took me at my word and went for it. There are several others who've done that, and really it's the way to go.
Yeah. Can I just add that in my experience, and I don't know if this is true, but my experience is that to publish on the internet a whole manuscript is, like you said, a crapshoot. You're going and going and going, and it ends up being, in my opinion, just like the old days. Who do you know? I wouldn't be here if I hadn't met you. The internet is a vast sea of thousands of writers now. And how you find your way there seems to me extremely difficult.
I'm going to ask you each one more question, which is your book titles. Can you explain your book titles?
Go, Eleanor, you go first because my answer is so pragmatic.
Well, mine is too, probably. This is how we get through the night, so it's all pragmatic. Well, Gone to Earth. That's the cry. If anyone knows about fox hunting, an unpleasant sport for the rich, when the fox has found her den, the cry goes up, "Gone to Earth," and you hear it across the land. It means the fox has found her den and is safe. Obviously, there is in this need to take cover and the sense of threat in that title, and the identification with the fox, the sign of a young writer. I'm pretty immune at this point. And also the other meanings of that, there are many, but Gone to Earth has to do with the whole direction of change, which is to stop putting value on a vertical, I'm doing a church steeple here, on some kind of verticality, that the higher you get and the further from Earth, the better, the holier it is. In fact, this is a relocation of the sacred to the earth on which we live. And it is something going on largely. This was my beginning at this many years ago, to find the earth again. So this fox represents both that younger female taking cover in metaphor and trying to, in a state of semi-hibernation and slowly coming out by the end of the book. But it's also about that getting down to earth again.
Well, my title came because the original title was so bad. I didn't even realize the original title was so bad. It was called Ranch Poems, which is the first third of the book. But, when I think ranch poems, I think of all these poems, but not an outsider. Why would they pick it up? And you, Barbara, and then I polled a couple of my other close friends on this title, How to Feed a Horse. But I was very resistant. I had to be persuaded because I thought it would indicate that it was an agricultural manual. But of course it isn't. It's got this beautiful George O'Keeffe cover and it says poetry. But that was my resistance, and it's the perfect title.
Good. Okay. what do you think? Should we keep going back and forth, or
are we running out of time? If
maybe
so,
we're running?
We want to hear from you, Barbara.
Okay, let's. I'll take over and let you all know what's next. We hope for Crooked Hearts, but both of your stories, but Eleanor's in particular, reminded me of my teacher Jane Miller telling a story that I've kind of wondered if it's true or not, but about Rilke getting dressed in a tie and a suit every day and going upstairs and writing poetry for several hours and then coming back down. And Crooked Hearts is not about that. Crooked Hearts is, as you've heard both Janice and Eleanor speak of, a journey and a process. And as Eleanor said, it comes among many things that are being juggled. So I'm in that category too. I am a mom of 3 children, and I would get up and write in the mornings from 4:30 to 6:30. And that was before the children got up and before I had to get them ready for school. And I did this for many years. And so maybe after, well, and maybe what's next for Crooked Heart is my coming out of the closet. I have put together a novel, and we'll piece it together, and it will be the next venture in Crooked Heart. And with your indulgence, I'll read just a tiny bit of it.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to read to you the very first chapter. It's written from a husband's point of view who's learning how to drive. And it's called Frank Learns to Drive. My wife, Joy, was expecting our first child at the time and did not want to drive herself to the hospital when she went into labor. She said it would not be safe. She gave me an ultimatum: get a driver's license, and if I didn't, she would ask her sister to drive and be with her during the delivery of the baby. As it turns out, I hate my sister-in-law. I finally settled on a driving school called Bulldog Enterprises. The school's owner, Ralph Ensign, was a discharged vet, African American, who had lost his right arm in combat. The bulldog of the school's name, I learned while talking to Ralph that first time, referred to his determination to learn to drive with one arm and his fight with the state to allow him to set up a driving school. It was not easy, he explained to me over the phone before we started our lessons. I had to demonstrate to the state that I could be steady while driving, and you can, if you place your one hand at the top and center part of the steering wheel. I asked, do you take students with 2 hands? And Ralph said he did, and we scheduled our first meeting. After three driving lessons, Ralph called my wife. Listen, I really need the money, but if your husband does not quit talking during these lessons, he's going to fail his driver's test, and I have a 100% success rate. I'm thinking of dropping him. I guess Joy cried. After what must have been a great deal of negotiation with Ralph, Joy, my wife, joined the 2 of us on the driving lessons. She lay on the back seat with black silk shade over her eyes, her large, pregnant belly a nice arc I could see in the rear view mirror. She and Ralph both agreed that she would not watch, which is why she wore the eye shades. Her presence did quiet me down. River Road, Ralph said, is the best place to learn to be steady. Frank, place your hands at the wheel at 10 and 2 position and have your eyes guide you. Your hands, and not your hands through curvy roads like River. After 3 false starts, Joy suggested, with her blindfolds on, that we pull over. She said, Frank, get out of the car. She took my hands in hers and practiced the Lamaze breathing we had been reading about in the evening. Her blindfold was now resting on her forehead. Her strategy worked. I relaxed, and with a few exceptions, I began to hug the curve. Fairly or unfairly, I don't know. I usually dismiss Joy's ideas. Her strength is not her rationality. Her persistence is her strength. Doing Lamaze breeding may have been a good idea, and it may have been a bad idea. In Joy's hands, it was inevitable. Breeding and hugging the road, I did them both. Eventually, I received my license. To celebrate, I bought 2 cases of mangoes at the farmer's market. Joy had never had mangoes before she was pregnant, and she ate them all in one sitting. Jake was born 2 weeks later, followed 2 years later by Tess, and 2 years after, there was Mia. I think it was a good run. I'm a manic depressive, and I learned to drive. Thank you. Okay, any final thoughts, comments before we call it an evening?
I'm good.
Okay, just urge everyone to go to Red Hen and order these amazing books. Get them for your friends, the ones that are disembodied and the ones that aren't, and you'll be everybody will be very thrilled to read these, I know.
I would like to thank Red Hen for their, lifting a wing and taking us under.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful working with them.
All right. Thank you all
everyone.
so much. This was wonderful. It was so great to hear that little preview, Barbara. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
And we're so excited for the future of Crooked Hearts Press. So thank you all so much.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
All right. Thanks again for joining us tonight. Don't forget, you can pick up the new collections from Janice and Eleanor at the link in the chat. And you can get 30% off with the promo code Hen House at home. We have so many more incredible events coming up over the next few weeks. Our Hen House at home continues next week with Judy Braun, Kim Stafford, and Gary Lemons. And our NEH Poetry Reading and Conversation Series continues on May 26th, featuring Jason Schneiderman and Ellen Bass, with Douglas Manuel moderating. Stick with us Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific right here, and we'll see you next week.